I am going to come now to you, Brian, because this is kind of a legalistic question. This is a second bite at the apple. Until we get John back, I'd like to hear your impression of how you think it's going in the courthouse relative to this evidence that the prosecution has decided to come right out of the box with.
Yeah, happy to be with you. Yeah, I think some of the most important evidence so far to support the prosecution, in my opinion, is the testimony, I believe, of McCabe early in the morning. Remember when they found O'Keefe's body, and she hears Karen Reed say, I think I hit him, or did I hit him? Did I hit him? Did I hit him? I think she said it 3 times.
Right.
And then you've got a paramedic that's already testified in this case where he clearly overheard Reed say, did I hit him, or I hit him? That's the first big bombshell piece of evidence I think that's powerful. And then you have the comment by Karen Reed allegedly about the taillight, right? About her showing Jen McCabe where the damage to the taillight is. Why is that important? Because that is showing potentially a consciousness of guilt, right? If you're certain that your SUV did not impact O'Keefe, then why are you mentioning damage to the taillight and you're commenting on damage to the taillight? That's huge, because that gets to an issue of what's called the manner of death. This case is extremely confounding. The reason why there was a hung jury in the first place is because in most murder cases, you know how somebody was killed, right? If somebody was killed with a bullet, you know somebody pulled a trigger,
right,
and shot that gun. Here, we know what the cause of death was. That was blunt force trauma to O'Keefe's head. But the manner of death is up in the air. Even you're going to hear probably from the coroner in this case, where she's going to say, I don't know, that's undetermined. So
right.
The manner of death is huge here. Prosecution wants to say it's the SUV, and I think they've gained some traction, on that potentially being the cause of death or the manner of death.
No, you're actually right. And, this is one of those cases where, if you accept the defense's sort of version of things here, well, then there's a massive police collusion going on. There's this big conspiracy that apparently some of the other first responders are in on. And now it's even potentially grown to include the Celebrite witness, because there was some impugning of the Celebrite reporting. And that's kind of the beauty of that kind of a defense, because anything that comes in, you can point to that. But yet there is always this counterfactual of, why did Karen Reed behave as she did? As you point out, to me, when she gets there and finds him in the body, her first inclination would have been, what happened? I left him at a party and he's in the snow. She doesn't do that. Instead, she does what you're talking about, Brian. So I think that's very perceptive, and it could be something that the jury picks up on.
Does that lead you to a conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Ryan, that's pretty compelling. Put your defense attorney hat on. Where you're going to go on cross? Do you think Jackson did a good job? What can you do with testimony like that?
Yeah, you're right. That's tough for the defense. Why? Because the $1 million question in this case is, did O'Keefe go inside the house? Did he ever make it inside the house?
Right.
And because remember, the defense argument is, hey, he made it inside that house, and then somebody inside that house hurt him, killed him, and tossed him and put him out and staged him out in the front yard. This testimony suggests to the contrary, that O'Keefe doesn't make it into the house. The phone sitting there the whole time, the phone going from hot to cold, the camera being closed. What does that show? That the snow is probably on top of that, blocking it. So that's really, really helpful testimony of the prosecution. One other point I wanted to make, though, Paul, getting back to what Guy said about cross-exam of McCabe, Alan Jackson needs to be careful in this case. Why? Because you don't want to be a bully in front of a jury, right? There's a difference between cross-examining a witness to get impeachment, right? And then selling that home in closing argument versus, hey, wait a minute, I can't get you to say this, but I'm going to get you to say this. And if I can't get you to say that, then I'm going to drop on you, like you did the other day, 227 pages of a grand jury transcript and say,
Right.
hey, didn't you say something different in that grand jury transcript? You can't do that in front of a jury. There's a difference between animus and evidence. Jackson's got to focus on evidence and not create animus with these witnesses, like Guy said, that are potentially bonding with a jury.
So, Brian, it's a little echoey, but the gist of that is that Karen Reed is copping to essentially having 6 to 7 drinks. She's trying to argue that they're watered down. That's why she ordered a shot to go with a few of them, and she dumped the shot into the drink and so on and so forth. But look, she's not a large person, and she is talking about that she's had almost into, if not into, double figures in drinks. The jury hears that. Now you're the defense attorney. What does it do? What do you think it does to the prosecution's case relative to the idea that even the manslaughter, that maybe she hit him but didn't mean to kill him, et cetera? Can you tease it out for us?
Well, that's a great point. You're reading my mind. I want to mention on something that John mentioned. I disagree a little bit with the impact of McCabe's testimony about maybe suggesting that this is second-degree murder. What do I mean by that? Because McCabe also said that Karen Reed appeared to not really recall what happened that night, right? I think there's a consistent thread in this case where Reed is saying, I don't even remember much about being in the driveway.
Right.
And then when you combine it with, hey, she drank a lot of alcohol, then I think that the defense can make an argument that you can't form an intent to kill somebody if you're barely recollecting what happened in the driveway, number one, and number two, like you just said. I mean, she clearly had a lot of alcohol to drink. I think that was a big mistake for her to be talking like that. It's kind of arrogant as she's trying to downplay it. Downplaying the amount of alcohol she drank doesn't help with her trying to defend a second-degree murder charge. It would have been better for her to say, hey, look, I pretty much got tanked that night. I don't remember much of what happened that night. Did I hit him? I don't know. That should have been her theme. But look, at the end of the day, we're talking a lot about how Reed's case is going south. But she still really has a powerful argument I want to just mention, which is the physical evidence of death, that's his head trauma, that the tail light to me appears to be lower on the SUV. And what Alan Jackson's got to do in this case, when he gets a hold of this case, is how in the world does a tail light hit O'Keefe in the head and cause a death? And there's no, by the way, O'Keefe's 6'1", I think. The tail light's lower on the car. There's no bones broken, from neck down. He's got a black eye. You've heard about all the mechanism, the scratches and everything. The physical evidence, the forensic evidence on O'Keefe's body just really doesn't suggest that he was hit by an SUV. That's got to be their number one. And then number two, real quick, they've got to go after this guy Proctor. You talked about it a little bit with this cover-up. Yeah. Look, if you're going to argue a cover-up against a police department, then you better have something like the policies and procedures of that police department. I don't know if you recall the Dalia DiPolito case in West Palm Beach, Florida. I did 2 retrials for her, and I almost won the first retrial I did. I almost won that retrial. I got a hung jury with her on videotape saying, hey, I'm 1,000% sure I want to kill my husband. How did I do that? I subpoenaed all of the policies and procedures of the Boynton Beach Police Department. I got all their directives, and I went through each time that they violated the policies of their own police department in doing this undercover investigation. And what Jackson's got to do, if you want to blame a police department, you better have those policies and procedures in place to cross-examine Proctor and whoever else investigated this to show that jury how specifically they broke the rules. Well, he's got to do that.
That's going to be coming up almost certainly. You're going to see Proctor come on the stand and get ripped apart because of those texts, and they're putting a black hat on him. I get that. But there is a distinction that can be made between him acting like, let's be frank, a bit of a knucklehead, then between that and did he do the investigation right? Because all the stories that I hear about him prior to this event was that he was a good investigator. And, full disclosure, I worked with the Massachusetts State Police, and, they're a very professional and experienced outfit with a lot of institutional knowledge. Go ahead.
Yeah, but he didn't, from what I learned, what you're going to hear in this case, if they replicate the first trial, he didn't go in and interview anybody in the house. They didn't do a deep dive into all those witnesses in the house. And if you're a defense lawyer and you are saying that there's a potential alternate mode of death here, that somebody else may have killed O'Keefe, you owe it. You've got a duty, and your policies will tell you that you've got to go in and do recorded interviews of everybody in that home.
Fair
if
point.
that didn't take place, I mean, Paul, that really does suggest bias by Proctor in favor of the Boston PD.
And almost certainly Jackson and the team are going to go there, and they're going to argue tunnel vision, and they're going to say, you know what, you excluded any other possibility except Karen Reed, and that's where you went. But you know what? Maybe I'm tilting prosecution, and I want to make sure I don't do that. We have to go with the facts. Brian Claypool, defense attorney, what is your final take here after the second week of our testimony?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. There's 4 big fights in New York City, I think, tonight, boxing matches going on in Times Square. And this
They usually
trial, yeah, well, this is the first fight happening right in Times Square, where I don't even know if they're going to have seats at this fight. I think people are going to be standing and watching these big fights. I'm friends and a big fan of Ryan Garcia. That's why I know it.
Yeah,
but look, I mentioned the boxing matches tonight is because this trial is a full-blown boxing match, a big-time, high-energy boxing match where John's right. I think the prosecution has won the first few rounds of this fight, right? But like any boxing match, you're going to have some rounds going to the defense, and then it's going to tilt back in favor of the prosecution. So I think we've got to wait and see what evidence comes in the middle of the case and toward the end of the case. I'll leave you with this. I think there's no chance that you're ever going to get a guilty verdict on the second degree. I just don't think the jurors are going to hear enough to say that she really portended to try to kill John O'Keefe and just because they were having a disagreement. Don't think that's going to fly. And just so your viewers know, in that first trial, the jury did reach an acquittal on that, but it was never read to the jury. Right. But look, on the vehicular manslaughter, I think that could go either way. I think it's going to be hard for the defense to get an actual acquittal on that. I think you might have another hung jury on the vehicular manslaughter. Why? Because of what I mentioned a few minutes ago, the mechanics and the manner of death. You're going to have a coroner say, I don't know how he died. Right. And then you've got the physical injuries that just don't support being hit by a car. I think really at the end of the day, you're going to find that might create enough doubt in some jurors' mind to find in favor of Reed. But I don't think she's going to get an actual acquittal. I think you're going to get a hung jury on that. Yeah, well, I mean, look, as sort of, I don't want to say slipshod because that's too pejorative, but let's be frank. Even in closing the first time around, the prosecution had some trouble. They ran out of time, etc. It seemed a little shambolic, but even then, you didn't get the full acquittal. So while people tend to say, oh, God, the case is a mess. Yeah, listen, they still didn't get an acquittal across the board the first time around. And that argues to me that there is compelling evidence for at least one of the 3 charges that are in play here. And it may not be the murder, too. That wraps up week 2 of Karen Reed Retrial Live. John, Lauren, and Brian, once again, thank you for joining me. Thank all of you at home for watching this Fox News Nation special.